Hi everyone. My name is Ethan Mitchell. And for the first 18 years of my life, I felt like a ghost who had accidentally forgotten to leave this world. We lived in Austin, Texas, in a neighborhood where all the houses looked alike, neat lawns, two-story cottages with obligatory American flags on the porches and SUVs in the garages. Our house on Hillside Avenue was no different from the neighbors: white siding, a red front door, old swings on the porch that creaked with every gust of wind. My parents, Daniel and Sarah Mitchell, were model members of the middle class. My father worked as an architect at a reputable firm. My mother taught English at the local middle school. Twice a year we went to Florida on vacation. Every Sunday we went to church, and on Thanksgiving all the relatives gathered. At first glance, the perfect American family right out of a magazine. But behind that picture lay a different reality that no one suspected. My older brother was Caleb Mitchell, the name spoken in our house with such reverence, as if we were talking about the heir to the British throne. He was 3 years older than me, and from my very birth, an unspoken hierarchy was established between us, one that no one questioned. Caleb was the sun around which our entire family system revolved. I was just a small planet somewhere on the outskirts of that system, sometimes forgotten to be included in the orbit. I remember my earliest conscious memories. I'm about 4 years old, sitting on the living room floor trying to put together a dinosaur puzzle. It's not working out, the picture just won't come together, and I start to whimper. Mom is sitting on the sofa reading a book. She looks up, gives me a distracted glance, and says, "Ethan, honey, play quietly. Caleb has a math test tomorrow, he needs to study." I look at Caleb, who's sitting at the dining table with an expression like he's solving advanced calculus problems, though he's actually just doodling circles in his notebook. But Mom looked at him with such adoration, such pride, that for the first time in my life, I felt something very painful inside. I didn't know then that this feeling was called jealousy, mixed with a sense of my own irrelevance. The years passed, and this pattern only strengthened. Caleb did everything there was to do in our town. Football, basketball, swimming, guitar lessons, drama club. My parents drove him to all these activities, sparing neither time nor money. I remember Dad getting up at 6 every Saturday morning to drive Caleb to a football tournament in the next city. He'd come back only in the evening, tired but happy, and at dinner, he and Mom would spend hours discussing how Caleb scored a goal or made a great pass. I'd sit there, picking at my mashed potatoes with my fork, silent. Sometimes I'd try to interject something about what happened at school, like getting an A on an essay or my art being chosen for the school exhibition. Mom would usually say, "Good job, Ethan, that's wonderful," and immediately turn the conversation back to Caleb. Dad might just nod, not even looking up from his plate. Their attention was like a limited resource, and almost all of it went to my brother. I got only the crumbs that fell from the table. My birthday was always a problem. It fell in mid-April, right around the time Caleb's baseball season started. I remember turning 7. I woke up in the morning anticipating a celebration, thinking that finally this day would be about me. Mom came into my room with a cup of cocoa and said, "Happy birthday, sweetie. We'll celebrate tonight, right after we drop Caleb off at his game. I'll bake a cake, and we'll blow out the candles, okay?" I nodded, though something inside me broke. That evening, we did blow out candles, in a rush, between getting back from the game and bathing Caleb, who was tired and wanted to sleep. I made a wish. I wished that just once, someone would notice me. The wish didn't come true. In my teenage years, it became even more blatant. Caleb got a new car when he graduated high school. A used Ford Mustang, but for our budget, it was a huge expense. I overheard my parents discussing it in the kitchen. "He deserves it, he worked so hard this year." I worked hard too. I got straight A's, I participated in science Olympiads, I even won the city math competition in 9th grade. But when I brought the certificate home, Mom said, "Put it on the fridge, dear," and went back to ironing Caleb's uniform. My achievements were taken for granted, as if they were nothing. They simply expected me to be a good, quiet, unobtrusive boy who didn't cause any problems. Caleb was allowed everything: bad grades, skipping school, even minor trouble with the police when they caught him with beer on the beach. My parents scolded him, but somehow kindly, with a hint of admiration. "He's just a boy, he'll sow his wild oats." If I'd gotten into that kind of trouble, they probably would have locked me in the basement for a month. But the most painful thing wasn't what they did for Caleb, but what they didn't do for me. I broke my arm when I was 12. I fell off my bike coming home from school, and my arm swelled up so much I couldn't move my fingers. I came home, barely holding back tears. Mom was in the kitchen, baking chocolate chip cookies, Caleb's favorite. "Mom, I think I broke my arm," I said, showing her my swollen wrist. She turned around, looked at me with slight irritation, and said, "Ethan, put some ice on it. Caleb has a date with Emily tonight. I need to drive him to the mall. If it doesn't get better by evening, we'll go to urgent care." I sat in my room until evening, holding a bag of frozen peas against my arm, which hurt more and more. Evening came. Mom didn't come. She was late with Caleb. Dad got home from work late and went straight to sleep. I spent the night biting my pillow from the pain. The next day at school, my teacher saw my arm, already blue and impossibly swollen, and called an ambulance. At the hospital, they said I had a displaced fracture, and if I'd come a few hours later, there could have been irreversible damage. When my parents got the call from the hospital, they arrived with guilty faces, but I already knew. They felt guilty not towards me, but about the inconvenience I'd caused them. In high school, I finally understood that the only way to survive in this family was to become as independent as possible. I got a part-time job at the local supermarket, mopping floors and stocking shelves. The money I earned, I saved for my first laptop and for my future education. My parents didn't object, they didn't care. Meanwhile, Caleb went to college but only lasted 6 months. He was expelled for academic failure and constant truancy. He came home and announced he wanted to start his own business. My parents, without hesitation, gave him the money, all the savings they'd accumulated over the years. Caleb opened an auto parts store which, of course, went bankrupt within a year. But my parents didn't lose hope. "He's learning from his mistakes, it's normal." I was in my senior year, preparing for university admission, and I was sickened by this injustice. I got into the University of Texas at Austin for computer science. My parents reluctantly gave me a small sum for the first semester, saying I'd have to earn the rest myself. They kept giving Caleb money for his endless startups, which died one after another. I didn't complain, I just worked. During the day I studied, at night I coded freelance projects, on weekends I worked in the student lab. I got used to sleep deprivation, to constant fatigue, to counting every penny. It was unfair, but it toughened me. I knew that one day I would escape this swamp and build my own life, without their help. I wouldn't owe anyone anything. 4 years flew by in an instant. I graduated with honors, with a portfolio of dozens of successful freelance projects and recommendations from professors who saw real talent in me. In my final year, I interned at a company called Nova Tech Solutions, a small but rapidly growing tech startup specializing in software development for large corporations. That's where I met Richard Grayson. Richard was the complete opposite of my father. About 50, with neatly graying temples and the eyes of a man who had been through dozens of business ups and downs, he had a rare gift. He could see people. Real people, not the masks they wore. During my internship, I was working on a database optimization project, and Richard noticed how I approached problem solving. Instead of just completing the task, I analyzed the entire system and suggested several improvements that went beyond my scope. Richard called me into his office and said, "Ethan, most people just do their job. You try to make it better. That's a rare gift. Do you know what you want from life?" I answered honestly. "I want to be independent and do what I'm best at." He nodded and offered me a permanent contract right after graduation. I accepted without hesitation. The starting salary was higher than I could have imagined, $60,000 a year. For a guy used to saving every penny, it was a fortune. I rented a small studio apartment near the office, bought decent furniture, stopped counting every cent. But most importantly, I finally felt needed. Richard valued my opinion, listened to my ideas, entrusted me with important tasks. Within a year, he promoted me to senior developer, and my salary rose to $80,000. 2 years later, I became lead developer with a salary of $110,000. I couldn't believe my luck. I was doing what I loved, and they were paying me money I'd never dreamed of. During this time, I barely communicated with my family. My parents called every few months, usually when they needed something from me. Caleb never called at all. I knew from mutual acquaintances that he still lived with our parents, periodically trying to start some business and periodically failing. I didn't care. I had rebuilt my life, and in this new life, there was no room for them. 5 years into working at Novatech, I'd saved enough money to do what I dreamed of since childhood, buy my own home. I didn't want to rent anymore, didn't want to depend on landlords, didn't want to fear being asked to leave. I wanted my own corner, my own fortress, where no one could enter without my permission. I found the perfect apartment in Clarksville, one of Austin's most prestigious areas. It was a 2-bedroom apartment on the 7th floor of a new complex with panoramic windows, a view of the lake, and a private terrace where you could put a grill and invite friends. The apartment cost $450,000. I made a down payment of $100,000, saved over the years of work, and took out a mortgage for the rest. On the day I received the keys, I came to the empty apartment, sat on the floor in the middle of the living room, and cried. I hadn't cried since childhood, but at that moment, I let my emotions flow. I did it. I built this life myself, without anyone's help. I was no longer invisible. I furnished the apartment with modern furniture, hung posters of my favorite movies on the walls, bought a huge TV and an expensive coffee machine. I enjoyed every moment of my independent life. On weekends, I went to the gym, sometimes went out to bars with colleagues, read books, watched series. I started dating a girl named Stacy, a pretty blonde from the marketing department, but it didn't last long because I realized I wasn't ready for a serious relationship. I needed time to get used to the idea that I deserved happiness. The past had dug too deep into my soul for me to just shake it off. I'd been living in the new apartment for about 3 months when that call came. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was sitting on the terrace with a cup of coffee, reading a tech article on my tablet. The phone rang, and the screen lit up. Mom. My heart gave an unpleasant lurch. We hadn't spoken in almost 6 months, since last Christmas when I'd sent them a card and a gift certificate to the supermarket. They hadn't even thanked me. I answered. Ethan? Mom's voice was unusually soft, almost ingratiating. Son, how are you? Hi, Mom. I'm fine, thanks. How are you? Oh, well, so, she hesitated. Son, your father and I would like to come see you. To talk. It's important. Very important for the whole family. I tensed internally. I knew that tone. Important for the whole family always meant important for Caleb. I didn't want to see them, didn't want to let them into my new life, but something in me, perhaps that small part that still hoped for their love, made me agree. Okay, come. When's good for you? They came on Saturday afternoon. I met them downstairs and took them up to the apartment. When the elevator doors opened and they walked into the hallway, I heard Mom gasp. They looked around the spacious living room with its high ceilings, expensive furniture, panoramic windows overlooking the lake with an expression like they'd walked into a museum. Ethan, Dad said, shaking his head. This is incredible. How much does something like this cost? I gestured for them to come in. Please, sit down. Would you like coffee? Tea? I have fresh lemonade. Mom sat on the edge of the sofa, looking around with barely concealed curiosity. Dad walked through the room, touched the kitchen countertop, peeked out onto the terrace. Expensive, I bet, he repeated. I manage, I replied dryly, placing cups of coffee in front of them. So, what did you want to talk about? Mom and Dad exchanged glances. An awkward pause followed. Mom clasped her hands together, Dad cleared his throat. I waited. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice trembling. Ethan, it's about Caleb. Your brother has big problems. I sighed. Of course. I knew. I always knew. What kind of problems? His business. That small auto parts store we put our retirement savings into. It went bankrupt. Mom wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. He's left with nothing. Absolutely nothing. And now he's living with us, with Becky. Becky. I'd heard about her from mutual acquaintances. Caleb's girlfriend of about 2 years. Worked at a beauty salon somewhere, loved flashy clothes, and according to rumors, had a very mercenary view of life. We're not young anymore, Dad continued. Our house is small, it's cramped for them. And it's hard on us too. We're both on pensions, the pension is small, all our savings went into that unfortunate store. But you, we know, are doing well. Prestigious job, your own apartment, looks like you have enough money. Mom leaned forward, looking at me with pleading eyes. Ethan, your brothers. Brothers by blood. Help him. You have 2 rooms here, you're alone. Give them 1 room, at least temporarily. And help a little with money until he gets back on his feet. We're begging you. We're family. Family. The word hit me like a slap. Where was this family when I broke my arm and spent the night with a fever? Where was this family when I worked at the supermarket to buy my own textbooks? Where was this family when they bought Caleb a car and told me there was no money for new jeans? I looked at them. On their faces was genuine concern. But that concern wasn't directed at me. It was directed at Caleb. I was just a tool to solve their problems. Two feelings warred inside me. On one hand, a burning, long-held resentment that demanded I throw them out and forget this conversation like a bad dream. On the other hand, deep down, a flicker of hope that if I helped, they would finally see me, appreciate me, love me. That hope was irrational, stupid, childish, but it was still there. I took a deep breath and spoke as calmly as I could, though I was boiling inside. I'm not just giving him money. I worked 10 years to get what I have. I didn't sleep nights, I studied, I worked 3 jobs while you sponsored his failed projects. But, I can offer something. They waited, frozen. I'll talk to my boss. Our company is growing, we always need people in tech support. Not high-level positions, but decent work with a salary, it's possible. If Caleb agrees to work, and not just sit around waiting for money to fall from the sky, I'll ask Richard to hire him. My parents exchanged glances. Disappointment flickered in their eyes. They'd clearly hoped for a simple solution in the form of a pile of cash. And about the room, I continued firmly. I'll rent it to him. As a tenant. But the price will be symbolic. Say, $300 a month. Do you know how much a 1-bedroom apartment costs in this area? $1,200. I'm not charging him for utilities, that's another $200 or $300 in savings. But he will pay. That's my condition. He needs to understand the value of things. It will be a contract, not charity. Mom threw up her hands. Ethan, how can you charge your own brother rent? He's already struggling. Mom, this is my house, I replied, trying not to raise my voice. My rules. I'm doing more for him than was ever done for me. That's non-negotiable. Dad, always more pragmatic than Mom, nodded. Okay, Ethan. Your conditions, they're reasonable. We'll talk to Caleb. I think he'll agree. He has nowhere else to go. Caleb and Becky moved in a week later. I'd taken the day off work specifically to meet them and lay down the rules from the start. When they walked into the apartment, I immediately felt my personal space shrink, as if someone had thrown a heavy blanket over me. Caleb was unrecognizable. As a child and teenager, he'd been slim, athletic, with a charming smile that opened any door. Now he was a bloated man with a puffy face, red veins on his nose, and a perpetually dissatisfied expression. He wore cheap jeans and a stretched t-shirt with some rock band logo. His hair was greasy, and he smelled of sweat and cheap cologne. He walked in, looked around, and instead of gratitude, sneered, "Nice little pad, bro. You've really set yourself up, haven't you?" Becky matched him perfectly. A skinny blonde in her mid-20s with fake eyelashes, bright pink nails, and eyes that scanned every item in the room, assessing its value. She paraded through the living room, her heels clicking on the parquet, ran a finger along the kitchen counter, peeked into the refrigerator, just opened it and looked, without asking, and finally stopped at the panoramic window. "Holy crap, what a view," she drawled. "Caleb, look, there's even a built-in dishwasher. And some expensive coffee machine. You want one too, right?" Caleb grumbled something unintelligible and flopped onto my sofa without asking permission. I suppressed my irritation and said, "Come on, I'll show you your room." I led them to the end of the hall and opened the door to the guest room. It was a bright room with a large window, a queen-size bed, a built-in wardrobe, and a small desk. I'd specially prepared it, fresh sheets, clean towels in the adjoining bathroom, a small bowl of cookies on the desk. "This is where you'll live," I said. "The bathroom is shared, but I usually use mine mornings and evenings. We can coordinate times if needed. The kitchen is shared. You buy your own groceries. Simple rules. No noise after 11, clean up after yourselves, don't touch my things. If you need something, ask." Becky entered the room, looked around, and grimaced, "Cute. Of course, your room is bigger with a lake view. This one faces the courtyard." I said nothing. Caleb came in after her, dumped 2 huge bags on the floor, and asked, "What's the Wi-Fi password?" "On the fridge," I replied. "Tomorrow we're going to my office. Richard agreed to talk to you. If you do well, you'll get a probationary period. If you screw up, you're out. Keep that in mind." Caleb rolled his eyes. Yeah, relax. Tech support, it's not exactly rocket science. I'll manage. The next day we went to the office. Richard, true to his word, gave Caleb half an hour. I didn't attend the interview, but later Richard came to my office and said, "Ethan, I'm hiring him only for you. He has no qualifications and no desire to work. But he'll get his probationary period. We'll see what comes of it. But if there are problems, I'll fire him without warning. You understand?" "I understand, Richard," I replied. "Thank you." Caleb was hired as a junior tech support operator with a salary of $35,000 a year. It was peanuts by our company's standards, but for someone who hadn't worked in 2 years, it was an opportunity. Caleb, of course, took it as a personal insult. That evening, he sat in the kitchen, drinking my beer. Did he ask? No, of course not, and complained to Becky, $35,000. It's an insult. Me, Caleb Mitchell, answering calls from some idiots whose keyboards are broken. When I was his age, I was running my own business. Becky sat across from him, painting her nails, and replied lazily, "Well, your business went under, honey. You'll have to work for the man for now." I came out of my room, hearing the conversation. "Caleb," I said calmly, "if you don't want to work, get the hell out. I'm not forcing you, but as long as you live here and eat my food, show some respect to the people helping you." He looked at me with hatred but said nothing. Becky gave me a strange smile and said, "Oh, Ethan, don't mind him. He's just tired from the move. We're really grateful, honestly." "Right, Caleb?" Caleb muttered something unintelligible and buried himself in his phone. I returned to my room and closed the door. An unpleasant feeling grew inside me that this was only the beginning. The first few weeks were relatively calm. Caleb went to work, with great reluctance, but he came home angry, collapsed on the sofa, and turned the TV up full blast. I told him to keep the noise down. He snapped back, but lowered the volume. Becky stayed home all day because she wasn't looking for work. She was still assessing the job market, she said. She cooked, badly, watched series, loudly, and constantly rearranged things in my apartment. I'd find my mugs on the wrong shelves, my towels in their bathroom, my food eaten. I tried to ignore it, putting it down to people needing time to adjust. But then I noticed Becky starting to look at me strangely. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then those looks became more obvious. When I passed by, she'd hold her gaze a moment too long. When I spoke in the kitchen, she'd listen with her mouth slightly open, as if I were giving a lecture on quantum physics. One evening, Caleb stayed late at work. He was asked to cover for a colleague on sick leave. I went out onto the terrace with a cup of coffee to read the news. 10 minutes later, the terrace door opened and Becky came out. She was wearing a short pink silk robe that clearly suggested nothing underneath. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders. She came up to me, stood too close, leaned on the railing, and sighed. "Can't sleep, Ethan?" she asked softly, almost purring. "Reading," I replied dryly, not looking up from my tablet. "And I can't sleep. Caleb's not here, it's boring alone." She turned to me and put her hand on my shoulder. Her hand was hot. "Maybe you'll keep me company? Have some wine, chat?" I shrugged off her hand and moved away. "Becky, go to bed. It's late." She didn't take offense. On the contrary, she smiled even wider. "Oh, so serious. And I thought you were an interesting guy. Not like Caleb. He's always whining, always dissatisfied. But you, independent, successful. Your own apartment, prestigious job. I bet girls are lining up?" "None of your business," I cut her off. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see anything like this again." For an instant, anger flashed in her eyes, but she quickly composed herself. Okay, I get it. But the offer still stands, if you change your mind." She winked and left, swaying her hips. I stayed on the terrace, feeling anger rising inside me. This situation couldn't be worse. If I told Caleb, he'd probably not believe me or would accuse me of provoking her. If I didn't tell him, Becky might continue her games, leading to even bigger problems. I decided to wait and observe. The next day, I tried to talk to Caleb alone. He was sitting in the kitchen, drinking beer before work, at 9 in the morning, mind you. "Caleb, we need to talk," I said, sitting across from him. "About what?" he asked, not looking at me. "About Becky." He raised his head, and something like suspicion flickered in his eyes. "What about Becky?" "She's showing inappropriate interest in me. Last night, when you weren't here, she came onto the terrace in her robe and tried to flirt. I told her to leave, but you should know." Caleb stared at me for a few seconds, then burst out laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh, but an angry, hysterical cackle. "You're serious?" he asked, getting up from the table. "You're actually sitting here telling me my girlfriend is hitting on you? Who would want you, Ethan? With your eternal seriousness, your books, your arrogance? You think just because you bought an apartment, every girl wants you?" "I'm telling you the truth," I said firmly. "I don't want anything from her. I'm just warning you, as your brother." "As my brother?" He stepped closer, clenching his fists. "What kind of brother are you? You're just a lucky bastard who got lucky with a job. And now you're eyeing my girlfriend too? You know what, Ethan? Shove your brotherhood. I don't want to hear another word about Becky. Got it?" I stood up, looking him straight in the eye. "Got it, but remember what I said." "Screw you," he spat, and stormed into his room, slamming the door. From that moment, the atmosphere in the apartment became unbearable. Caleb stopped talking to me, looking at me sideways like an enemy. Becky, on the other hand, became even more provocative. She walked around the apartment in short shorts and crop tops, bent over me when I was at my computer, tried to touch me under any pretext. I ignored her as harshly as possible, but she wouldn't stop. Then the rumors started. First, strange looks from colleagues. People I'd lunched with for years suddenly started avoiding me. Whispers behind my back, conversations abruptly ending when I approached. Then someone from HR, Linda, whom I had a decent relationship with, pulled me aside and asked, "Ethan, is everything okay at home? You look tired." "Yeah, fine," I replied warily. "Why?" "Just, some talk has reached me," she hesitated. "But it's none of my business. Take care of yourself." I knew something was going on. Soon after, Richard called me in. When I entered his office, he sat with a very serious face. "Ethan, sit down," he said, pointing to a chair. "I need to talk to you as a friend, not as your boss." I sat, feeling something was wrong. "What happened, Richard?" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Rumors have reached me. Very unpleasant rumors about you and your brother. I don't like gossip, but when it starts affecting the work atmosphere, I have to step in." My heart sank. "What rumors?" Richard looked at me carefully, as if assessing my reaction. "People are saying you threw your brother out on the street. That you're charging him exorbitant rent, taking advantage of his situation. That you tried to steal his girlfriend while he was at work. And that you're generally acting like an arrogant snob who's forgotten where he came from." I closed my eyes. Caleb, my own brother. Instead of dealing with the situation, he'd spread filthy lies about me at my own workplace. The workplace I'd found for him. "Richard," I said, trying to stay calm though I was seething inside, "it's a lie from the first word to the last. The rent is $300. $300. In this area, that's nothing. I don't charge him for utilities at all. I bought this apartment myself, without their help, and I have the right to rent it on any terms." As for his girlfriend, she came on to me. Repeatedly. I told Caleb to let him know the truth, and he chose to believe her. Now he's trying to smear me to justify his own behavior. Richard listened attentively, without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I believe you, Ethan. I've known you for 5 years. You've always been honest and decent. But the problem is, the rumors are already circulating around the office. Even if we refute them, the stain remains. You understand?" "I understand," I replied. "And I know how to stop it. I'm asking you to fire Caleb." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? He's your brother." "He's not a brother," I said bitterly. "He's a person who uses me and slings mud when I try to help. He's had complaints from clients, he's constantly late, he doesn't do his job. And now he's scheming. He doesn't belong at Nova Tech. And I don't want my reputation to suffer because of him." Richard thought for a minute, then nodded. "Okay, I'll process his termination today. For non-compliance with job duties. Ethan, I'm really sorry it turned out this way. Hang in there. If you need help or just support, reach out." I thanked him and left the office. In the hallway, I ran into Caleb, who was just coming back from lunch. He looked at me defiantly. "Why so gloomy, little brother? Boss chew you out?" "You're fired, Caleb," I said calmly. "Effective today." He froze, his face first paling, then flushing red. "What? You did this? You got him to fire me?" "You did it yourself," I replied, walking past him. "With your gossip and your work ethic. Pack your things. You're moving out of my apartment today." I came home early to catch them. Caleb had keys, but I didn't want to give him time to maneuver. When I walked in, they were sitting in the kitchen. Caleb was drinking beer. Becky was painting her nails at the table. On the table sat my plate with my fruit. "Pack your things," I said from the doorway. My voice sounded hard as a knife blade. Caleb choked on his beer. "What did you say?" "You're fired, Caleb. I asked Richard to do it. Now you're moving out of my apartment." Immediately, Becky jumped up, nearly knocking over her nail polish. "You can't do that. We're your family. Where will we go? This is my house," I enunciated clearly. "And I have every right to decide who lives here. And you," I turned to Becky, "shut up. I know all about your games. And about how you came on to me, and how you turned him against me. Pack your things. You have 1 hour." Caleb stood up, clenching his fists. He was bigger than me, and for a second I thought he'd start a fight. But in his eyes, besides rage, I saw something else. Confusion. Fear. He didn't know what to do without Mommy always solving his problems. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Doubtful," I replied. Clock's ticking. I went to my room and closed the door. I heard them running around the apartment, packing, arguing, slamming closet doors. Exactly 55 minutes later, I came out. In the hallway stood their bags and boxes. Caleb stood by the door, face red, Becky beside him, lips pursed. "Keys," I said, holding out my hand. Caleb threw the keys on the floor. "Choke on them. Pick them up," I said calmly. "And put them in my hand. Or I'll call the police and say you're breaking into my apartment." He stared at me with hatred, but bent down, picked up the keys, and threw them at me. I caught them. "Good luck, brother," I said, opening the door. "Hope I never see you again." They left. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it. My head was spinning, my heart pounding. I'd just thrown my own brother out on the street. And, strangely, I felt not guilt, but enormous relief. As if a heavy weight had been lifted from me, a weight I'd carried my whole life. The phone rang almost immediately. "Mom, Ethan," she screamed so loudly my ear rang. "What have you done? Caleb just called us. You threw them out on the street. You fired your brother. How could you, you ungrateful, heartless egoist?" I listened to her, and a wave of anger rose inside me. Anger I'd been accumulating for 27 years. Anger at them, at Caleb, at all this injustice. "Enough," I roared, and Mom fell silent mid-sentence. "Enough, Mom. Shut up and listen." I spoke, and the words poured out like a river. I told her everything. About the arm they didn't treat. About the birthdays they ignored. About how I worked at the supermarket to buy my own textbooks. About how they bought Caleb cars while telling me there was no money. About how I studied nights while he wasted his life. About how I built my career without their help. And about how I let him into my home, helped him get a job, and got lies and slander in return. "You never loved me, Mom," I said finally, and my voice cracked. "Never. For you, there was only ever Caleb. I was just an extra mouth to feed, someone you tolerated. I did everything myself. And when you needed help, you remembered you had another son. And I, idiot that I am, helped. But no more. Don't call me. Ever." I hung up and turned off my phone. Then I went into the living room, sat on the sofa, and sobbed. For the first time in years, I let myself cry out everything that had built up inside. I cried for myself, the little boy who just wanted to be loved. And for the man who had finally learned to say, no. Several months passed. I took a short vacation to recover. I went to New Mexico, wandered through the desert, looked at the stars away from the city lights. There, in the silence and solitude, I thought a lot about my life and realized one important thing. I'm not obligated to carry other people's burdens. I have the right to happiness. I have the right to my own life. When I returned, Richard called me in and told me the board of directors had approved my promotion. I became head of the development department with a salary of $150,000 a year. It was recognition of my efforts, my work, my talent. I was proud of myself. And soon after the promotion, I met Chloe. She worked in the neighboring department as a UI designer. We crossed paths at a few meetings, and I noticed that she wasn't just beautiful, but also smart, witty, with a genuine smile. One day, I asked her out for coffee. She agreed. We sat in a small coffee shop near the office, and the conversation flowed so easily, as if we'd known each other for years. Chloe told me about her family. She had wonderful parents who lived in Dallas. Her hobbies, she loved skiing and photography. Her dreams, she wanted to open her own design studio. I listened, amazed at how calm and good I felt with her. We started dating. Chloe didn't know my whole story, but she sensed that I wasn't quick to open up to people. She didn't push, didn't try to save me or change me. She was just there, warm, reliable, real. Gradually, step by step, I told her everything. About my parents, about Caleb, about how I was ignored as a child, about how I'd thrown them out of my life. She listened silently, and when I finished, she took my hand and said, "You're an incredibly strong person, Ethan. Not everyone could go through that and still be themselves. I'm proud of you." That evening, I knew I loved her. Meanwhile, news about Caleb reached me. An old school friend who still kept in touch with mutual acquaintances told me over a beer, "Heard about your brother? Becky dumped him." Oh? I raised an eyebrow, though something inside me stirred. Yeah, left him for some manager at the car dealership where Caleb was working. Word is, before she left, she told him the whole truth. Said yes, she did try to come on to you, because you're successful and promising, and he's just a loser living off his mommy. Said he's a mama's boy and she has no future with him. How's he taking it? Not well. Totally falling apart. Moved back in with your parents. Mommy's comforting him, dad's silent. Word is, he's drinking a lot. I felt no joy, no pity either, just a strange emptiness. Caleb had chosen his path. I'd given him a chance, and he'd used it to bite me. That was his nature. Today I'm sitting on my terrace. Chloe is beside me. We're drinking tea and watching the sunset over the lake. The water shimmers gold and pink, the sky slowly darkens, the first stars appear. Chloe rests her head on my shoulder, and I feel her warmth. In the living room behind us sits a small box. Inside it is a ring I bought last week. I plan to propose this weekend when we take a short trip to San Antonio. I know she'll say yes. I feel it. My parents don't call anymore. I blocked their numbers after that conversation. Sometimes I think about them, but without the pain I used to feel. They made their choice, and I made mine. I no longer wait for love that never existed. I built my own family. Small, but real. I hear Caleb still lives with our parents. He's over 30, no job, no girlfriend, no future. Mom, they say, still brings him breakfast in bed. I don't judge him, I just feel sorry for him. He never learned to be an adult. He's still a little boy, waiting for mommy to solve all his problems. But I learned. I went through pain, through resentment, through betrayal. I fell and got back up. I rebuilt myself. And now I know. The most important thing in life is learning to let go. Let go of the past, let go of grudges, let go of people who drag you down. And open your heart to those who truly love you. Chloe stirs and lifts her head. What are you thinking about? She asks. How lucky I am, I reply, kissing the top of her head. I'm lucky too, she smiles. The sunset fades. A new night begins, and after it will come a new day. And in this new life I've built for myself, there's no room for ghosts of the past. Only the present and the future. My future. Our future. I take Chloe's hand, and we sit like that, in silence, watching the lake ripple in the evening breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. Somewhere, music plays, but here, on my terrace, there's only silence and peace. And for the first time in my life, I feel that I'm home. Not that house on Hillside Avenue where I was never noticed, but here, in this moment, with this person. My home is where I am loved. And finally, I have found it.